Today we're installing a Madjax lift kit designed for a Club Car DS. Included in the kit is the lift itself, spindles, A-arms, rear spacers, rear brackets, and hardware. Now let's get started. Before we begin, you'll notice that we've raised our cart up and put it on jack stands and engaged the park brake. We've also removed our front bumper and our front cowl, as well as our front struts and our canopy. Now we can remove our front tires, now that we have our front tires removed, we're going to take our dust cap off and remove our front hubs. You want to retain your dust cap, your hub nut, and the hub. We'll repeat this process on the passenger side. Now that our hubs are off, we're going to remove the nut from the spring here, as well as the two nuts from the spindle bolts here. We want to retain the spindle bolts and the spindle bolt nuts, but we're going to leave the spindle bolts in place for leverage. We'll repeat this process on the passenger side. Now over on the passenger side, we're going to remove our nut from our tie rod here, as well as our rack and pinion here, and retain hardware. Now that our tie rod's loose and our rack and pinion's loose, we can remove the two factory bolts in our spindle and retain. You do not need your factory spindle anymore. Now we're going to repeat the same process on the passenger side. Remove and retain your bolts. You will not need your factory spindle again. Next, we're going to remove our A-arms. Now we're going to remove the factory A-arms. We're going to take the bolt here and here out. We do not need to retain the bolts or the A-arms. We will repeat this process on the passenger side. Now that we have our factory A-arms removed, we're going to take off our spring and our spring plate by removing 4 bolts that go through the top of the frame into the spring plate to the bottom of the frame and retain. Now we're going to do the same thing on the passenger side. Now that we have our factory spring and spring plate removed, we're going to attach our Madjax lift kit. On the top of the lift kit, there's 4 holes that match the 4 bolts that we took out of the frame. You want to line those up and use the nuts to tighten up your lift kit. We're also using a jack to help hold it in place. We're going to make sure that all 4 bolts are in place before we completely tighten. Now that all 4 bolts are in place, we're going to tighten our nuts. Now that we have our lift kit attached, we're going to install our A-arms. This is the driver's side. You'll notice that the spring bracket is welded on the top, and it should be on the front side of the golf cart. Now we're going to use our supplied bolt and attach our A-arm We'll repeat this process on the passenger side. Now we're going to attach our spindle to our A-arms and our lift kit. This is the driver's side spindle. It has the one arm that comes off and ties into our tie rod. Using these hex head bolts, we're going to attach it to our A-arm at the top and our lift kit at the bottom. We also need to put some locking adhesive on the bolts. Once both bolts are in place, tighten. Once those are in place, you can attach your shock to your A-arm using the hardware supplied. Then we can reattach our tie rod to our spindle. Tighten all hardware. We'll repeat this process on the passenger side. Now that our castle nuts are tight, we can reinstall our pins and our tie rod and our rack and pinion bolts. Now we can reattach our factory hubs, as well as our factory dust cap. We'll do this on the passenger side as well. Now we're going to reattach our bumper, cowl, and front struts and install our wheels. As you can see, we now have our tires installed, as well as our bumper, cowl, light kit, and struts, and our front lift kit is complete. Now we're going to move on to the back. Now you'll notice we have our rear jacked up. We also have our front wheels chocked. Now we're going to remove our back rear tires. Now that our rear wheels are removed, you'll notice that we placed a jack under our rear axle to support weight. What we're going to do, we're going to start on the passenger side, and we want to loosen the nut on the shock and the two nuts on the U-bolts. Do not completely remove them. We're going to come back to this side later. Now that we're on the driver's side, we're going to completely remove the nuts from the shock and the U-bolts. You do need to save your shock hardware. You do not need to save your U-bolt or your U-bolt nuts. Now we're going to remove our factory spring. We're going to take this bolt here, as well as this bolt here at the rear of the cart. Take those out and retain. Now we're going to install the alignment bolt in the factory lower bracket. This will help align the upper and the lower brackets of the lift kit. Now we can drop our lift. We're going to install our rear spacer. As you can see, there's a lower side and a high side. You want the lower side towards the front of the golf cart. There's also a hole on the top of the spacer that your spring, the nut on the bottom, will sit inside. Now you can take your spacer, put it on top of your axle, take your spring, put it on top of your axle now. You may have to lower or raise your rear axle with your lift. Make sure that you keep lift under there to keep pressure on the axle. Once your spring's in place, go ahead and reattach with your factory hardware and tighten. Now that you have your spring attached, we're going to raise up our axle and line the hole in the top of our spacer with the nut on the bottom of our spring. Now we're going to take our bracket and place it on top of our spring. Our spring nut's going to go in this center hole. Our U-bolt's going to go on the outside holes here. And then our shock is going to go in here. Put our shock hardware back on. You don't want to tighten your shock all the way, you just want to hand tighten it so it's secure. I'm going to raise my axle up now. Now we're going to reattach our lower bracket. Make sure that the hole lines up in the bottom of your axle. Now we can install our supplied U-bolts. Once both nuts are on, you can tighten your U-bolt. Make sure that both your alignment nuts stay in the holes they need to be in. Now that we have our U-bolt secured, we can go ahead and tighten our shock. Once that's finished, we'll repeat this process on the passenger side. Now that we have the driver's side done, we're going to go ahead and remove our shock bolt and our U-bolts. Now that our U-bolt and our shock's loose, we're going to go ahead and take out our factory spring and retain the hardware. Now we're going to install our alignment bolt and our bottom factory bracket. Now we're going to lower our lift so we can put our spacer and our spring on top of our axle. Be sure to keep some support under it with the lift. I'll reattach our spring on top of the axle and the spacer. Tighten the hardware. Now that the hardware is in place, we're going to attach our lower bracket and our shock to our upper bracket and our U-bolt. Once your U-bolt's in place, you can go ahead and tighten the hardware. Now that that's tight, we'll put on our rear wheels, remove our jacks, and we're done. Now that we have both rear tires on, you can remove your floor jacks, and you're finished installing your Madjax lift kit designed for a Club Car DS. Now to align your front wheels, you need to back off the nut on your tie rod on your driver and passenger side. And then you can turn your tie rod and align your front tires. Once you're satisfied, tighten your nut up. There's also an alignment for your steering wheel as well on your rack and pinion. Loosen up these two nuts here and here. Turn that, and line up your steering wheel. And the third one here is to adjust your toe end. This is whenever your cart sits in on the bottom of your tires. What you'll do is back off the nut here and the nut on the back side of this lift kit. Pull your tire out at the bottom, tighten your nut back up, and you're finished.